Welcome to Season 2 of WitchLit, a space to talk about the craft of writing and writing the craft. I'm your host, Victoria Raschke, author, publisher, witch, and nosy Scorpio. Mortellus is a lineaged third-degree Gardnerian high priestess of the Long Island line, presently busy at work on their third book for Llewellyn Worldwide with the second, The Bones Fall in a Spiral, A Guide to Necromancy and the Magic of Death, set to arrive on shelves September 8th, 2022. In addition to their role as High Priestess, Mortellus is a mortician and holds degrees in design, education, fine arts, and mortuary sciences. Their areas of expertise include necromancy, necrobotany, mediumship, and the funerary rites of minority faith groups. They currently reside in Western North Carolina on 3 acres that double as the covenstead for the Coven of Leaves with their spouse, children, and dog, and generally wish there was more time in the day for hiding in the studio and playing with clay. Mortellus, welcome to WitchLit.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here and to finally get to see your face after talking online so many times.
Yes. Yes, all of the email back and forth. It was nice to have faces to go with that. Well, I mean, I've seen your picture online, but it's nice to have an animate face, I guess.
It probably didn't set you up for like saddled flannel and t-shirts, but but your viewers wouldn't, or listeners would not have known that.
Everyone thinks everyone can imagine we're dressed to the nines in our finest funerary black today. We'll just let them imagine that.
I might be wearing a prom dress in like fuchsia. We don't know.
Oh. I like it.
No telling.
So our first question, since we're a podcast about writing, is why write? When there are all these other ways to communicate these days, why write?
Oh my gosh, that's like the worst question for me. It really is. I don't know. I feel like I do the worst service to writers because there are so many very passionate people in the world who work so hard to be authors, and that's their dream. But I sort of fell backwards into writing books. It wasn't really purposeful for me. The truthful answer, the sort of the bigger picture, I guess, is even when I was young, I really loved to write. I've always written poetry, and when I was a little kid, I really wanted to grow up and be a poet. That was kind of my dream. But it's not like I was writing novels or writing fiction or anything like that. As to how I came to be writing my first book for Llewellyn and how I just sort of wound up doing this crazy thing, I was teaching a class at Mystic South in 2019, 2018, something like that. One of those years way back there. And Llewellyn does 5-minute pitches at that event where you have this opportunity to go in and do a sign-up sheet at a certain time, and you have 5 minutes to pitch an editor on your idea. And people plan in advance for these and take chapters of their books and cool stuff and resumes and awesome things because they plan ahead, and I don't. I did not sign up for that at all. It wasn't something that I meant to be doing, but I was chatting with a very cute girl who was manning a clipboard on that particular day. And in an effort to continue that flirtatious conversation, I gave them my information, which they wrote on their clipboard, which was a pitch list. So while chatting with them, I wound up getting called and was sitting in front of an editor, left going, what am I supposed to say right now? I had nothing to hand them. I had no plan. And I don't know, when they hit start on the timer, the thing that came out of my mouth was to talk about my time in the death care industry, and then just really how I felt that pagan families were mistreated and the sort of Christianization of practices to the point of just sort of losing a picture of anyone else. And I picked a thing I was mad about and talked about it for 5 minutes, thinking at the end that I would just go on with my day and forget about this silly adventure I just found myself on accidentally. I sort of summed it all up by saying, this is the thing someone should write. that editor called me a few days later, or sent me an email rather, and they thought I should be the person to write it, and so here I am.
There you go.
It's not a very glamorous story, or even
but funnily enough, I think it is a little consistent with what I've heard from other authors, especially in kind of our witchy space, that I don't know.
Right place, right place, right time, kind of.
Yeah, right place, right time, or knowing someone or someone mentioning you should be the person to write this book. And I do think there is a little bit of that, if there's a book you really want, you're probably the person to write it. So yeah, I don't think it's that unusual in this world.
It's funny. I have horrible imposter syndrome because I constantly, I think, probably because of that exact situation. I feel like I'm not an author. I'm just sort of posing this one. I don't belong here. Someone's going to figure that out at any moment and just come sprinting out of the bushes like they're a fraud.
Yes. You are not alone in that feeling. Although I will say, you've completed 2 books and you're working on a 3rd one. And even if those had never seen the light of day, you're still a writer. So. Right.
And but I would totally give other people different advice than I give to listen to myself. But yeah, I think writing is half the thing. And if I'm being as charitable with myself as I am with others, I have been writing poetry and I've had a blog, for many years. So I guess I've been a writer this whole time, but I just don't give myself that much credit.
I think it's really hard. I mean, I'm not really a full-time writer. I still have a little day job, and obviously I have a podcast and do some other stuff, but I still have a hard time introducing myself as a writer, even though that is the majority of what I do. I still have a hard time saying that's what when people ask me what I do, I have a hard time saying it. So I feel you completely on that.
It is such an odd feeling because I think, I don't know, we are an odd little world. I feel like, oh my God, do you ever have like a dumb thought pass through your head and you're like, I'm going to say that right now, but that's going to become like the most oddly controversial thing I ever said. I feel like humans are always inventing gods and kings, right? We're always doing that. There's something innate about it. And yeah, a person isn't comfortable calling themselves an actor unless they're, winning an Oscar and they're on television. But there are tons of people doing amazing community theater work the whole world over, and they are that. And we too sort of put on a pedestal certain kinds of authorship, the kind that's the New York Times bestseller list or the classics or whatever. And if you're not that, then it's not the same, right?
Right.
We feel less than somehow. And I don't know. I wouldn't want to be one of those authors like J.K. Rowling, who's like super famous, mostly because J.K. Rowling is an asshole. But that's a different conversation.
That's a different conversation. But yeah, no, that kind of fame is, I do not ever want the kind of fame where you no longer belong to yourself.
Right. I don't, I make approximately zero amount of money writing. I mean, for everyone listening, let me disavow you of the fact that authors are making any money. Nobody's doing that. I'm hugely, hugely devoted to transparency in authorship. So you've probably seen my posts where I go, these were my taxes this year. This was how much royalties I made this quarter. I've made less than, I'm like just rounding wildly off the top of my head, but I've made less than $3,000 writing ever. That's royalties. That's I wrote a magazine article. That's I got paid to speak at an event. That never happens either. So we're not getting rich doing that. And that's fine with me because I'm glad that I feel like I have ownership over who I am and what I'm doing. And I feel like I could be in my integrity in a way that probably a more famous, in quotes, author can't really be. Not that fame disallows you from integrity, but just that whole idea that you don't always have control over how you're perceived. And I love that, I have the freedom to answer every email someone sends me, or if it might take me a little while to get there, but I do answer them all and talk to people all the time. And I love that we still have the opportunity to just be humans.
I mean, I guess kind of on that thread, what do you see as success as a writer?
Success as a writer? Mm-hmm. Having written something.
Yeah,
if you write a sentence down, you're an author. I think it's the doing that makes you the success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that defining success piece and whatever your endeavors are is important, because my success probably doesn't look like yours, and somebody else's is going to look totally different. But I think that's important too.
For me, success is getting an email from a stranger that says, yeah, someone I love died and I felt alone, but I found your book and it made a difference. Mm-hmm. Success for me as a writer is someone sending me a Facebook DM and said your blog post made me laugh, or whatever. I love those really, really human exchanges. That's enough for me. That's makes me happy, brings me joy. It's more likely to be some email from like a shitty white guy on Twitter who got mad about something, but
sometimes it's the good ones. Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know, it's interesting because anybody who's listening who is not a writer, who just likes to listen to writers talk, do you reach out to writers with good things to say about their stuff? I mean, I do think there still is this weird, and I've encountered it a few times and it always throws me off because, like you said, I have my own imposter syndrome stuff. And then when I do tell people I'm a writer, it's like I'm suddenly a magical unicorn that they never thought they would see in the wild. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. It's not like that at all.
It is a weird thing. I think I do reach out to other writers because I think people just don't do that. Like, I think there's this assumption that everyone else is doing that and that you're too much to be doing that, or it would be a bother, or you're a weirdo or something. But please reach out to your authors. It's actually a super nice thing to do. But I have a box on my bench behind me right now where I was sending a candle I made to Neil Gaiman, just like, thanks for writing stuff I like, because it's writers could do with more of that, just appreciation, love. And
I mean, he's talked pretty openly about his own imposter syndrome, which I think is, for someone who admires him and considers him an inspiration, that's, it's heartening, but also disheartening to hear that he struggles with that too.
One of the biggest compliments I've ever gotten in my life was someone reading my upcoming book, The Bones, Ball, and Spiral, and telling me that the epilogue made them think of Neil Gaiman's writing. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that is.
You've lied, but thank you.
Yeah, no, I it's funny because my biggest one is too is someone said that my series reminded them of American Gods, and I was like, I'm gonna go lay down now. You lie, but I'm gonna go lay down now. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I feel you on that.
But I think on the more, to answer that question on more like the pagan occult world kind of scale, I don't know that I'm necessarily reaching out in that kind of way, but I think I don't know if there's an author that I care about or appreciate or believe has integrity, and that's really important to me. I'm much more likely to reach out and we are friends now. How can I help? Mm-hmm. I bet you could take a poll and find 20 authors without even trying that I reached out and helped edit stuff or beta read stuff or just whatever that I could do to pitch in, because I think people realize how exhausting that kind of stuff is. Mm-hmm. And yes, I'm adding to my own pile, but it's somehow less stressful to do that kind of stuff for other people than for yourself.
Yes. No, I agree. I have a beta read of a novel for a friend sitting on my to-do list right now. So
I could do that in an afternoon, but if I'm reading through my own stuff, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to ruin it in the hour I'm doing that because I'll just start messing with stuff.
Yes. Oh, so when you get an open time to write, what does writing look like for you? Do you have rituals around writing? What's your perfect writing day?
Magical rituals? Sure,
or even mundane ones.
Mundane ones, more likely. I do so much silly crap. That's not even funny. I bought this 1 terabyte like micro SD card, this teeny tiny little thing, and had this amazing jeweler in Australia who did it for far cheaper than I'm comfortable with, make me just a little silver locket with my Crow logo on it that I can hide it in. If it's closed, you can't actually tell it's a locket at all. So I wear that every day. And one of the first things I do is put it on. It's got all my books on it. That's all it is. It's just filled with writing. So it's kind of a talisman of creativity, but also protecting my words. It's about holding them sacred and safe, keeping them close to my heart. And I make my cup of tea. That's a big part of my day. I've definitely put ritual into making my morning tea. I get up before anyone else is awake. I do my best writing in the morning, I think, when everyone else is sleeping. But that probably says more about the fact that I have twin toddlers than I do keep a daily planner, like an old school physical planner. Your listeners can't see it, but look at this mess.
Oh, nice.
It's got I'm just always scribbling crap in it. Isn't this awful? So every single day I think about what I want to accomplish, what my goals are, what I'm trying to do. It's like, today I'm really going to tackle that index or whatever. Mm-hmm. There are some things in books, I don't know if you feel this way, but there are certain things that are like low spoons or low spell slots tasks, and some are really large ones. So it's like, today is a day when I can only do things like indexes and table of contents, and I will write a glossary today. That feels like very low spoons. I like a very sort of specific kind of thought process. And then other days it's like I'm in that creative headspace, so I can write that epilogue that I want to feel like poetry. Mm-hmm. So I have to decide what headspace I'm in on that day. That's kind of my first goal. And then I always start out by saving a new copy, even if I haven't started. Save it to my little SD card. I take it out of the locket and plug it in. It's part of my ritual, and make sure I have it there to save to and back up to. And as I work, I do that. And anytime I leave my office, I save and unplug it and take it with me. And those kinds of things sort of keep me grounded. It makes the writing feel like a tangible object in kind of a meaningful way. I love to handwrite, just like pencil and paper, but I have rheumatoid, so that's not always great for me. So interjecting objects into the work kind of fills that need for me. I don't know. I feel like I'm sounding super weird right now.
No, I mean, I think, people already assume that all writers are weird. So I say lean in to that a little bit. It's like you've been given permission, so go with it. But no, I mean, I think it makes sense. I think a lot of writers are a little superstitious. And we're kind of joking beforehand because I was knocking on my desk about something, but is it superstition if it works?
Correct. You're like, are you even an author if you haven't lost every bit of work you did on a singular day?
No, I think we've all experienced that horror.
That is the worst. And it's probably someday when you didn't have it in you to begin with and you just scratched it out of the dirt. And then it's like, oh my God, I lost all of that. Fuck you. Fuck everything. Fuck me. Fuck the universe. Fuck God. I hate it.
All of it. Yes. And then I'm going to go lay down.
Those are the days where it's like, what other authors do I know that have the same busted life as me? They're all online right now. I guess I'm like texting Matt Oren and Facebook DMing Amy Blackthorne. You will not believe what just happened. I lost everything. Oh no.
Yeah. It's good to have a group around you that you can, I have a group of writers that we have an ongoing chat that would probably be, a very weird memoir of these 5 writers. If for some reason it ever saw the light of day, hopefully that never happens.
Hopefully that never happens because it's probably 90% like, you will not believe this jackass review I got on Amazon.
Some like grumbling at the world and raging at the world more likely these days. But yeah, it's a good place to have a safe space with other people doing the same thing you're trying to do.
I am still absolutely dying at this review I got once from a person who was really upset that I talked about I was talking about making mold death masks in my first book. And I mentioned blocking off the nasal passages with straws as an option. Like there are other options, but the review is like, this is very dangerous. You could injure someone's nose and they might not be able to breathe and whatever. And I just really wanted to scream into space from a mountaintop that it's dead people. We're talking about deceased individuals. They don't need to breathe. Here we are.
All right, my first really horrible review, I went to the same group of friends and was like, I know I shouldn't care. And the response was, now you have street cred. And I was like, okay, I will take that.
Storm Fairy-Wolf had posted on Twitter the other day a review that I thought was hilarious. It was about their fairy witchcraft book. And the review is like 2 stars or something. So this is a miserable review. And it's this book is great if you're interested in that tradition, but everything in it is about that tradition. It's not really a witchcraft book. It's like, who buys a book about a specific tradition? I'm going to get grouchy about it being that exactly.
Yeah, you can't really write a bad review for a book doing what it says on the cover. I mean, that seems...
I bought a French cooking cookbook, and how dare every recipe in it be French?
My 2-star review, my favorite 2-star review is I got 1 star because I could make actual sentences and another star because they liked the setting in the book. And that was it.
The worst reviews are the ones that are like, Amazon tore up my package.
Oh, yes.
I have no control over this, people. Please don't give me those reviews. I literally have no control.
Thanks for taking my overall rating with your, I'm sorry, Amazon spindled your book on the way there.
Like, I'm really sad that happened, that I have zero control. And those reviews are not for Amazon. They are for me.
That's always a fun one. So speaking of, we kind of, in that long conversation, mentioned your new book. So, which comes out later this year, The Bones Fall in a Spiral, which I have had the pleasure to read in an early edition, missing some of the lovely things that will come later, like the illustrations. But what was the seed for this book? We know the seed for the first one was your, random conversation at Mystic South, but what was the seed for this book?
So like the seed for its creation or for like pitching it? That's
let's say it's creation. Let's say it's
very
creation.
Different, very different answers. The first book was something that the world needed, I thought, and things I was mad about, wanted to change. This is my creating change in the world book. The second book is about what I do and what I love on top of that. And it's funny too. I think the first book came out and people had this idea that I was sort of a stodgy professional, but not really an occultist, because I do mortuary work. And the second book, I think, is more about going, but hey, I'm also this, and this is what I do. And I also, I don't know, it's probably terrible of me to say because it's definitely pointing fingers, but there aren't a lot of modern books on the topic. There really aren't. And the ones out there are, I'm going to be flatly honest and say, pretty terrible. Poorly cited or personal gnosis or just patently wrong information or Nazi propaganda and just like bigoted nonsense. So I just wanted to really write a book about a topic that I love so that other people could read it and know what I'm about and what this practice is about, devoid of all that awful stuff. I guess on the one hand, it's kind of super selfish because there's always going to be that whole, I hope nobody hears that I'm a necromancer and then goes and reads this other book and thinks that's what I'm like. Mm-hmm. So we've got to put our own thoughts into the world.
I don't know that that's selfish. I mean, I was reading it and I've read some of those horrible books. And the thought that I kind of took away, and I hope you take this as a compliment, this is like a kinder, gentler necromancy.
I get where you're coming from. I mean, I think necromancy it's so funny that it's kind of the last bastion of stereotypes, even amongst witches, which is funny because it's really just some Catholic bullshit. Y'all just put it down. Stop doing that. So I say this in the prologue. I really don't want people to think this is a fluffy necromancy book. It's not about that. It isn't. I definitely say the hard stuff.
Yeah.
But it does not have to be dangerous, illegal, ethically dubious,
disrespectful,
heteronormative, disrespectful, etc. I mean, we can talk about this magic in a way that's really meaningful. And fun facts, actually truer to historical necromancy to do so, which of course I also talk about.
Yeah, and I think a lot, like you said, a lot of witches who work with ancestors or ancestral spirits, or they're doing necromancy, but they don't call it that because the word is it has so many
loaded.
bad connotations. Yeah,
so loaded. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's no, like I said, it was to me, it was like, oh, this is what witches do. This is what it is.
Exactly.
Without all of this baggage that comes with it.
I'm you could probably tell by the bibliography, but I am really big into deeply researching a topic. And I wanted people to know that, if you're interested in necromancy, but don't give a shit what I have to say, actually, this is still a great book for you because it has a really comprehensive bibliography. Mm-hmm. And it can be a topic that's really hard to research. So having just that really comprehensive list is useful. Go research on your own and form your own opinions, and you can use that as a tool. Mm-hmm. But I found that a lot of the modern texts, and I say that as if there's a bunch, there really isn't. Modern texts take one of two flavors. They're either academic works that really aren't intended for pagan readers, and they're definitely not practice oriented, or they're really UPG driven. And I found that, I don't know, I think when you're researching a book, particularly nonfiction, you have to go, what's the need here? I know what I want to say, but what is the need? And they're often very different things, what you want to say and what the need is. And just in realizing that what was out there really didn't constitute a cohesive practice at all was a real problem area, to my eyeballs at least. You might grab a book that has, some spells and rituals in it, but they're not really telling you how to make this a practice that's part of your life meaningfully. They all seem to take this sort of tone that this ritual that you did today for this one thing might be the only necromancy ritual you ever do, and that it's not really a broader picture of your life. It's like something you pulled out for Halloween or something. So I wanted people to feel like they could walk away going, I'm going to learn how to be a necromancer, and that's going to be my magic. I'm going to work with death. Mm-hmm. And I wanted them to see that it can be protective, and it can be healing, and it can be beautiful, and that it is possible to incorporate it in your everyday magic. While I joke in the book that, as a person who is a Gardnerian Wiccan initiate, can't help but put a little Wiccan flavor into my writing. And I try and be super clear when that's happening. But it's not a Wiccan book, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. But I do talk about things like Sabbats, because I think we don't think about death magic as celebratory, really. And I wanted to show the reader that it can be. And I defer to you, but I hope I accomplished that goal.
Yeah, no, I think there were a couple places in the book, I think, just talking about, the kind of how birth and death, those are related, and we celebrate one and don't always celebrate the other, but there is space for that. And I think, I don't know, it was funny. This is kind of a personal anecdote, but my mother died in 2014. And we had the funeral for her at a funeral home. A minister came to speak. She was a practicing Christian at the end of her life. And it was a party. she'd been ill for a long time. I have a huge family and we don't all get together very often. And so there was a lot of talking and laughing and telling stories. And he says when he gets up to, talk about my mom, that he's never been to a funeral like this before. And I thought, what a sad thing to say.
It is very sad.
Because I was in mourning and I miss her and I still have those days where I'm just heartbroken. But, I think we all wanted to remember the best things about her. And that's what we were talking about. And we were enjoying that, being together because of her. We all exist because of her. So, it was just an interesting experience to have and to really see that there was not room for that somehow in his thinking, maybe a little bit.
Something talking about the rituals of writers, I had to partway through grab a piece of paper and write a note because I didn't know if I had spoken about this in my book, and if I haven't, I probably should fix that. But it's okay to celebrate death, but conversely, we also don't seem to think that it's okay to mourn birth, which I think is equally powerful. We're not really dealing with that balance in a meaningful way. I mean, who could bring a child into the world at this particular time in history and not be a little bit mournful at what we know they'll experience in it?
Mm-hmm.
And why not celebrate a life lived? Dance on that grave. I would dance on mine if I could.
Yes. I do like when people refer to wakes and funerals as celebrations of life. I mean, I know in some ways it's euphemistic because people don't want to talk about death, but I also appreciate that celebration is part of that. And I have been to many of those that were truly celebratory of that person's life. And so I do appreciate that trend, which seems to happen. We attended a Unitarian Universalist church for a long time, and it's very common in that circle of people to call them celebrations of life. So.
Amusingly, in the death care industry, for those of you who may not be in the know, a memorial is more like a funeral where the deceased person is not present or where their cremated remains are present. It's a remembrance of a kind. A celebration of life is defined specifically by the inclusion of photos or videography or stories about the life that they lived. So it's so called, yes, a bit euphemistically, but also as a way of defining what the tone is, what we're going to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I too love the celebration of life.
Yeah, it's definitely definitely different from the funerals of my childhood, I guess, that were kind of terrifying to a small person.
It's funny. I'm not sure what part of the world you're in. Suddenly I'm curious.
Oh, I'm in California now, but I grew up in East Tennessee. I'm a Southern girl. So
you know exactly what I was about to say. In my neck of the woods around here, I don't have much of the Southern Appalachian accent, but I did grow up in Western North Carolina. I live there still. We have what you might call the Irish wake. Did you grow up with a family that had wakes in the home?
We did not have wakes.
Yeah.
Which I lamented. I mean, my dad's family is Northern European and my mom's family is Scottish, Appalachian, English, whatever the Appalachian stew is. So, but we didn't have that. Wakes were not part of that mix. So
it's definitely a little more common this side of the mountains. I don't see it as much into Tennessee and Georgia and so on, but up toward Virginia and here in North Carolina, you see it quite a bit. But the Irish wake, so-called colloquially, is very celebratory in nature. You have the loved one at home, and there'd be food and feasting and drinking and all kinds of fun. Storytelling is a big feature. Mm-hmm. It might amuse your listeners to know that there's a reason we use terms like sitting room and living room. The sitting room in a home was for wakes. The living room is where you lived. The sitting room is for sitting with the dead. And one of the reasons why a 6-foot height door is common in homes is because the door had to be able to be taken off the hinges to lay the dead out on. You take the door off the hinge, cover it, drape it, sit it on like sawhorses, and that would be your board for laying out the dead.
Interesting. I did not know that. I just assumed that was because that's the, above the average height of humans. So.
No, 6 feet. Gotta use them to carry the dead. When doors will do in a pinch if you have an emergency and have to carry someone. Yeah, for the record.
That makes sense because you can get it through the doorway. If you take it off that doorway, you can get it through that doorway.
Correct. Exactly. There's so many fun little things that permeate our lives every single day that we just don't think about.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, I think that goes to that we're so removed from death at this point as a culture. I think we hide it as much as we possibly can. And we hide it in our language. We hide it in reality. It's just, we push it to hospitals and funeral homes and out of our home and reality.
I think that too comes with kind of a commodification of death as well. And I will say for the record, I am pro funeral home and I'm pro funeral industry. I'm not necessarily pro regulation and self-regulation of the industry. Mm-hmm. It does have a purpose in the world. It serves a function. They're necessary. But I do think that families should feel more empowered to get involved. And it's not like the option isn't there, has been taken from them. Mm-hmm. We just forget that it's available to you. And it's interesting to see people return to home burials and green burials, absolutely forgetting that you could just ask your funeral home if you could do those things. Mm-hmm. When you can, you certainly can. And there are things that are always going to be too hard for a family to do. So it's nice to have your friendly neighborhood mortuary worker on your side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, very similarly, it is the same thing. You can do a home birth, but it's nice to also have a professional involved, even if it's at home.
Correct. Yeah, one of the things that I always talk about is cremation and open air cremation. This will be a bit graphic, so I'll warn your listeners, but I think in the pagan community, there's a real interest toward open air cremation, funeral pyres, outdoor funerals. And I am very much an advocate. I really do think that is important. And I hope that we're able to successfully lobby for it. I have definitely done my part trying to help make that exist. Mm-hmm. But people think that you can just put a body on a fire and, it will be like cremation. And that is not the case.
Not how it works.
People really need to know that having a professional there to assist you in case you can't handle it is important, because first of all, it will take you at least 4 hours of constantly maintaining a fire to cremate an adult human. And you also need a very hot fire with something like pine. And you would need about a ton of wood to cremate the body. This would be like 2 truckloads, mm-hmm. constantly feeding the fire. That's a lot of wood. People don't think about that.
Yeah.
But if you are open air cremating someone, and I have been present for this, I have seen this in reality. I'll give you a pause moment in case you want to edit that weird sound out. We'll let you just have that. I have been present in reality for open air cremations. And I want people to think about, this is your loved one. It's your spouse, it's your child, it's your mother. You've been tasked with preparing their body, putting them on this fire, maintaining this fire. You have to constantly watch it. You have to constantly maintain the fire so it doesn't get out of control. There's a lot of fat in the human body, and it can start a wildfire very quickly. Mm-hmm. Now imagine what it looks like when you put a chicken in the oven to roast. Now imagine that chicken was not cleaned and didn't have its organs removed first. The body will start to bloat and split open, and there will be odors and visual effects that I think people are not as prepared for as they think they might be. Yeah. It can be incredibly unpleasant to watch, particularly when it's someone that you love. So you don't want to get into that process and realize you can't maintain it. You don't want to have a half completed cremation in your backyard.
No.
have to call the authorities because things have gotten out of hand.
Or you've set the woods on fire for them surrounding 10 acres or something.
Correct. Yes. So I'm a huge advocate of let's have these things, but I'm also a huge advocate of making sure there's some kind of regulation oversight so that people have someone to call on to assist and be there for them. I think that's important too.
Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. And it's kind of a question back toward the book, but
I'm such a rambler.
No. This is all important stuff. And I think stuff we don't talk about and we need to talk about. And I'm a Scorpio. Let's talk about this stuff, especially, so working on the book itself, did you find that your practice changed or deepened as you were kind of describing your personal practice? Because there is a lot of your personal practice in this book. How did that dance kind of happen for you?
That's an interesting question. I don't think you can write about pagan practices without incorporating new things in as you go, right? I just really don't think you can. Anybody that says they did, it's probably fibbing to you. I mean, you're always going to find stuff in your research and your work that you didn't already know, and you go, oh, neat. For example, as I was researching, I discovered that an absurd predominance of historical texts suggest that necromantic rituals be done on a Thursday afternoon in particular, which I found fascinating, and I have sort of incorporated into some of my practice. It wasn't something I was previously doing, but now it's like my favorite time to go, clean the cemetery and stuff.
What is the rationale? Is it Jupiter?
There's not a lot of rationale. And this is sort of specific to Swedish necromantic practices. You see it more there and things like the Svartböcker, but I'm not certain. They don't really elucidate.
Interesting. Now I'm curious. That's a rabbit hole.
I know.
I'm really anxious to go down.
Believe me, I went down that rabbit hole and I didn't really find an answer, but you know what? If it works, is it really
a whole
really
Swedish
superstition?
Thing? There is a whole Swedish thing about having pea soup on Thursday because one of the kings was poisoned with it or something.
Maybe it's just one of those wacky things. But,
yeah.
There's an entire series of rituals surrounding fart-based necromancy, which I did not incorporate into my life, but I do think are hilarious. So there's that. Let's see, other stuff I incorporated into my practice. I'm hitting a blank spot in my own mind. Isn't that horrible?
It happens to all of us.
I think that's the nature of already being into a completely different manuscript too. It's what the fuck did I write in the first book?
Yes.
I apologize if you're going to have to bleep me out for your listeners.
We have an explicit tag. I did that from the get-go because I thought someone's going to complain that this is about witchcraft. So.
Okay. So my sailor mouth is not a big deal.
You're fine. You are already taken care of in the ratings for our podcast. So
good to know. But yeah, I think there's always going to be something that you pick up. There's always going to be something you carry forward that you kind of make. And I think too, there's always going to be something that you didn't think about, but when you read it, you're like, oh, I'm fucking definitely not doing that ever. And that too becomes an opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
I found a lot of material, particularly modern material, that it sort of mimics the way people interact with Catholic saints. You see a lot of practice where we're sort of ask Saint so-and-so for this thing, but also bury their statue in the yard. And if they don't do the thing, pee on it or whatever, it's like we're punishing in advance. And then if they don't do the thing, you punish more. And if they do the thing, then maybe you dig them up or buy flowers or something, whatever. I saw a lot of stuff that's you don't give cool, awesome, nice offerings to the dead unless they're doing something great for you or whatever. And I'm not about that. I'm about, you should be friends with the dead that you work with. You should be giving gifts because they're gifts. And there should not be strings here. This should be a collaborative relationship. It should not be one of the necromancers subjugating the dead, like forcing them to do stuff. That's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
We do not need to work like that. They are human beings, just dead ones.
Right. It's also not a D&D campaign.
It's also not a fucking D&D campaign, which I love D&D, not specifically D&D, but tabletop role-playing games. So there's that. But
oh, I like it. So you've just finished your third book. So this is probably a good time to ask you this question. So what are you reading for fun or inspiration right now?
Oh my gosh. So inspiration, I don't know about, but for fun, I can answer that question very easily. So I just had my 40th birthday on the 30th of April.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. It was also my twin children's birthdays. I have to share. I'm not terrible. And my spouse
they're like, if we have to share our whole life, you have to share with us.
My spouse thought that I could use something to read that I didn't have to be reading. So they got me this wonderful hardback copy of The Powers of Darkness. Are you familiar with this novel?
No.
Oh my gosh. This is the best, like, weird little literary story ever, which I love. So Bram Stoker's Dracula, we've all heard of. It's a pretty famous book.
Pretty famous book, yeah.
So it's sold a good jillion copies or whatever, and it's been translated into all of the languages ever, right? So in 1901, an Icelandic publisher and writer was asked to translate Bram Stoker's Dracula into their language. And it was not noticed till nearly 100 years later that the translator really didn't like Bram Stoker's book very much. So he changed
I have heard this story. I didn't know that's what it was called, but I have heard the story, yes.
He changed it to suit himself, which made it a very different book. So I'm currently reading that, and it's a fun exercise in maybe have someone read your translation. Yes. But this particular copy that my spouse got me is neat because it has like all these wonderful footnotes that show the differences in the story. And the front has this huge history section. And they've even done stuff like, I'll find your photo. I'm sorry the listeners can't see it, but they tried to sort of suss out what Dracula's castle would look like, which doesn't function in reality, actually. If you try and make a map of it, it's the weirdest place. But I love that the translator was like, this book sucks. So I'm gonna jazz it up.
Yeah, there's another story about a book that won, like, I think in the UK, some huge prize in translation. And it turns out that they basically just wrote a book. They didn't, there's hardly anything to do with the original book. I can't remember the name of it. I'd have to go dig for it. Somebody will invariably email me and go, oh yeah, it was this one. But
the translator here writes in the dust jacket, it says that the resulting narrative of this translation is shorter, punchier, more erotic, and rivals the original in terms of suspense. It has a ton of new characters and new locations. Oh, wow. It's just the wildest story. It's just, the back is a whole like casting characters, like showing like who's new and who was in there.
I'll have to track that down. That's fascinating.
It's super fun. It was a great gift. I was really pleased to receive it. My spouse has good taste, I think, is the takeaway.
So before I ask you about what you're doing now and how people can get in touch with you, I had one kind of specific question about your book. Okay. So in the book, you share a spell or ritual to summon your Umbra, and hopefully people will read the book and they'll know more. I don't want to give too much away about all of this, but there was one thing in particular in that ritual that I was curious about and why it's a still coin from 1943.
So it's funny that you ask about the particular one. It's one of my favorite parts of the book. It has been edited a tiny bit from the version that you saw because my editor actually really wanted me to take that out. They didn't like this in the book. They wanted it to leave. Please I think my vision notes were just like, cut this out. There was just totally blunt. Like,
so did you win? Is it in the book?
Oh, yes.
Good.
Vision notes are suggestions, not the law. They can't. Remember that, people. They they thought that the idea of giving readers an opportunity to interact with you in such an intimate way, for those of you not in the know, it surrounds summoning part of my soul, and yet all of me if I am dead at the time that it's happening. So I'm planning ahead, I'll eventually be dead. It'd be a much cooler ritual then. But I put my foot down and said that, nobody can consent but me, and I'm the one consenting. So, so here we are. And the long and short of the ritual is that when I was a child, I suffered a very traumatic, I was sexually assaulted when I was 5. And that ended in me attempting to take my own life, and I died. I was in a coma for several days, and they declared me dead, and I revived after that time. Lucky me, I do not have an incredible amount of brain damage from being deprived of oxygen for like 28 minutes, so that's great. But it was hugely impactful to my spiritual life, but also it was really impactful on a very personal level, because I felt like there was this part of me that was no longer part of me after that experience. So the ritual kind of surrounds summoning that lost piece of me. So obviously the ritual really surrounds things that are very, very specifically personal to me. And the coin is kind of hard to explain, I think. It's, I guess the simplest way to get there is to say that my father's a horologist. He made and repaired clocks, and part of what he did was sold and dealt in antiquities, and had did jewelry repair and sold coins and those kinds of, like, rare coins. During World War II, pennies were made in steel because we needed copper for making wires. It's really important. So there aren't very many of them, and they serve kind of a particular function, and they're popular with collectors. And my father would buy 5-gallon buckets full of coins and have my sisters and I sit in this like dank little room and sort pennies all day, trying to find rare dates or unusual ones for him to sell, and we'd have to roll and card them. And I spent so much of my youth in these spaces with my hands smelling like pennies, just sort of meditatively rolling them and counting them and looking for dates, and just finding these really specific coins that they sort of become, it was just one of those things that became a part of who I am. It's part of my story. And for the person attempting the ritual to have to go on the task of finding that coin in the same way that I had to find that coin is a kind of connection that I thought I couldn't manufacture in a different sort of way.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I part of the reason I asked specifically, because I was on the hunt for years for Mercury dimes with my parents' birth years on them. And, or just Mercury dimes in general. I'm kind of obsessed with them. And so
I too, for the record,
which I noticed you mentioned them in the book too.
They're my favorite offering for the dead. Yes.
Yeah. And, so my son for Christmas last year bought me 2 Mercury dimes, and he tried to get them in my parents' birth years. They did not make them in my mother's birth year. They were not made because during the Depression. So I have a 32 and a 34 instead of a 32 and a 35. So wow. And I was like, interesting. So yeah, I learned something in his gift, because he was like, yeah, I had to ask because I couldn't find them anywhere. So
yeah, I think it's funny, the little things that become part of who we are, and I think there's a humongous emphasis on that's my word of the day for some reason. I don't know why I keep saying humongous. I'll just get that out of my mouth. It's, you write a paragraph and you realize afterward that you said, like, I don't know, some really specific word like 6 times. You're like, well, here, I'll start that over. Word of the day is humongous, people. there's a lot of emphasis in occult writing today on making things simple and accessible and really punchy. Like just to the point, like you want to curse this person or make them leave you alone or whatever. I don't know, write their name on toilet paper and wipe your ass with it and flush it. Flush them out with the other shit like they are or whatever. Like that's a spell. Everyone listening, go do it. Right. And that works. And that's witchcraft. I think that kind of really to the point, folksy sort of magic is really, really effective. It is. But it is kind of broad in a sense. It's really sort of, it loses a kind of specificity in its accessibility. So when approaching writing a spell that had such a specific purpose as summoning specifically a certain part of only my soul, I think this is where we get those spells that start to sound like D&D spells, because you need that kind of really specific connection to that person that you just cannot make any other way.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the opposite problem of curses, right? And curses are a whole other topic. Everyone listening, you can go hear me ramble about how I never do that ever somewhere else. But it's really easy to break a curse if you know exactly who cast it or you know what kind of spell it is, and far easier to break a curse generally than to prevent them. Why? Because to prevent a curse, you have to know all the possibilities. You have to know every single avenue by which you could be cursed, and your spell has to affect all of those things. That gets very complicated. It's very unwieldy. The same, I think, is true when you're doing something as specific as what this kind of ritual does, because you need all those little key points that are pulling you into the right direction. So that ritual also, I'm sure you noticed, calls for some very, very, very specific plants. One of those plants is Carolina nightshade. It only grows right here in this part of North Carolina. And people hate it. It's kind of like a weed. It just grows up everywhere. And I love it because it's our own little brand of nightshade that only we have. And I used a lot in my magic where other people would use different and fancier nightshades. So they had that kind of connection for me because I grew up pulling them out of cow pastures so the cows wouldn't eat them and their milk wouldn't taste weird. Making sure that my kids aren't wandering into them. So they have that kind of tangible connection to my life. And I don't know, I lost myself in my ramble, but I think there's that. The point is, yes, those punchy, accessible kinds of magic, they're great and they're good and they're needed. And I'm glad that that's the emphasis of most things right now. But I hope to show people that there's also a place for really, really specific kind of weighty, unwieldy almost spells. They have their moments. It's a specific moment, but when you need it, it's there. And it's funny, I got kind of a specific comment from two different people who read that book, and I wondered if you had the same experience. They told me more or less that it was the complications of that spell that made them curious about wanting to cast it. Not even a need, but just, I want to give that a try because it's so over the top.
Yeah. I mean, there was definitely that, like, what would this look like kind of thing.
Right. It takes a lot of doing, but
yeah, like there's some travel involved. There's some hunting. There's,
yeah, it's a bit of a scavenger hunt for all of the components of the spell, only to have this, like, this might not actually work. Like they could just say no.
Yeah. I know, as a fiction writer, it also really appealed to me because I've written spells for books that are that kind of specificity or have like a lot of history or weirdness behind them. And a couple times people have said, oh, is this like, this spell from, because the books are set in Eastern Europe, blah, blah. I was like, no, I totally made that up.
I just made it up, yeah. I definitely was relying on some real world types of sort of ceremonial magic, but it is definitely a ritual of my own creation. And I think I say this in the book, but it's like, you could not duplicate this spell and it work or you couldn't affect a person other than me with it. And you couldn't like rewrite it to work for yourself. You would have to craft
right.
your own ritual to do that exact task for a different person.
No, it definitely leaps out. Like it's definitely different than the other spells in the book. And so that was the one that really stuck. And the coin specifically stuck in my mind just because I have my own weird fascination with those things. I
feel like anyone who read my first book and anyone who has read this one along with it would know that I'm always trying to incorporate parts of myself into the story and parts of the things important to me. I'm always trying to sort of weave that into the narrative. We don't think about nonfiction books as having a narrative, but I think the best ones do, really.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I'm always trying to be vulnerable with how I present myself and how I am writing. And I know that probably sounds like its own kind of performative bullshit or whatever. that's a thing, right? But I don't ever want to get to a point where I feel like I'm trying to package myself or keep parts of myself that are just for me, and the public's having to see something different. I always want a reader to know that I'm giving them the most raw kind of access to who I am that I possibly can give them. Because if we're not doing that, what are we doing as writers? These works, we're not making enough money to do it, right? And we're not. Just the life work balance return on writing a book it's not good. So what is it for? It's its own kind of ritual. If we're purging things out of ourselves that we need other people to hear, it's a gift to us that they read them. So our gift can be giving them something true, something honest, and something real, even if it's uncomfortable or goofy. I think I say in the book that, you're going to see some of my UPG in a raw kind of way here, and I'm going to tell you that, and I'm going to be clear when it's happening. And I'm sure I probably look like a jackass half the time, but it is true and honest to what I'm doing. And that is the gift that I can give you. It's you thinking I'm silly if that's your choice. Like, because if we're not doing that, then we're not saying anything new. We're all rehashing the same information over and over like a shitty college essay. That's not useful to anyone. We're not adding to the conversation. So
right.
I hope that I'm able to do that in putting myself out there in the ways that I try to do.
No, I think you succeeded. At least from my perspective as a reader, I think you succeeded. So
I'm glad.
Good. So before we move on to our tiny game of chance at the end, I want to give you an opportunity to tell people where they can connect with you, buy your books, if you've got classes coming up, anything like that.
Oh gosh, I'm really, really terrible at what I call the used car salesman routine of interviews. So if you're interested in what I've got going on, just go find my link tree, which is like / A Crow in the Dead. And you can search that and find me most places. If you want to do something good for the world, go to www.fundthefuneral.com. There's no middleman. There's no % off of anything you donate, but funeral homes post when a family's really struggling. And if you donate to any particular funeral in the list, it goes directly to their bill at the funeral home. And if it's overpaid, the funeral home gives them a check. So it's a good way to help families really, really directly in a moment of grief.
That's awesome. I didn't know about that. That's great.
I always like to ask, you had the opportunity to read that before anyone did. What did you take away from it that you feel like might have impacted your practice or yourself in any measure?
I think for me, part of it was the idea that, I have been doing necromancy because I do have an ancestral component to my practice, and I have not been calling it that. And I'm going to own it. Like, I think that's the biggest thing for me is like, no, I'm just going to tell people I do necromancy. So,
yeah. And the more we do that, the more we reclaim the word every day. It's like reclaiming the word witch. We're taking it back.
Yeah. I have no problem with witch. So let's take that one too. Let's do it.
I'm glad. I'm so glad that means a lot to me, actually.
I mean, I've been going to all these classes about necromancy and stuff anyway, and it was just kind of out of interest and partly out of research for writing. But I was like, no, this is part of who I am too. So,
well, if you are interested for research, come hang out. I've got some classes up on my website, and we'd be glad to have you join in. And you'd be surprised. I could keep they're very small classes. I don't like to have a lot of people in them in the first place, but there's almost always an interesting face or two here and there. A lot of authors will show up and say hi. So,
oh, nice. Yeah, I would definitely check those out. Sounds good. All right. So our last question, and listeners know this, I like to talk about things we're not supposed to talk about. Shocking, a whole podcast about death. So I'm going to roll a die, and depending on what number I get, you will get a question related to your work or book about death, sex, religion, politics, or money. And if I roll a 6, you get to pick. This is the first time I've really been like, if you get death, I feel like we're cheating, but we'll go with it because I have another question.
So. We can re-roll death, but yes. I'm curious. Why a D20? Do you play tabletop?
Oh no, I actually use a D6.
Oh, it's a D6.
Yeah, it is from a set though. That was a gift from my bonus daughter. So
a polyhedral set. But do you play?
Yeah, we play. Our whole family plays D&D together.
I'm a Pathfinder kind of person, and I GM for society play, and I also have I always have dice on hand.
Oh, nice. Yeah,
they're
in my desk drawer.
Oh, my little skull D20. Someone, a reader sent it to me. But you might be interested to know. I'll give you a bonus, like behind the scenes for your. The name of the book, I really fought for. Authors don't always get to name their books. We can suggest names. We don't get to choose them, but I really, really, really fought for this title. It's really important to me. It is something that is a reference to Paizo tabletop role-playing games, Pathfinder role-playing. In that setting, there is a death deity called Pharasma. And in the lore of the world and of the game, Pharasma's holy text is called The Bones Land in a Spiral.
Oh, nice.
And I reached out to Paizo and spoke to them about it and told them what I was trying to do. And I told them that I felt like a big part of what I do and a big part of the story of my own magic was about playfulness and really reclaiming things that we've all kind of just let go of. And there's such a disconnect between the pagan community and gaming because of satanic panic and that sort of thing. And I'm all about reclaiming it. So they trusted me and gave me the opportunity to not only use the name, but to rewrite one of Pharasma's rituals as a real world ritual, which shows up in the book as well.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. The Bone Spiral devotion in the back of the book is a ritual to Pharasma in the world of Pathfinder RPG.
There you go. So readers or listeners, you can tell my whole world is. Listeners will get a special bonus for.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's roll this and see what happens. 3. So we didn't get death, we got religion, which we have talked about a little bit too. So one of the things I really took away from the book too is you write about like the nature of the soul and what happens after we die with conviction. Like this is your personal practice and belief. So I was curious, like, have you experienced doubt or a crisis of faith? And if so, how would you navigate that?
I have experienced a crisis of faith in my life, but it wasn't about what I do now, for sure. Is that cheating as an answer?
No, that's not cheating as an answer. There's no cheating in this game. It's impossible.
So I grew up in a fundamentalist cult. And one of the super fucking crazy ones where, feminine children don't go to school and you have babies and you're making children for God's army or whatever. Like it's super crazy stuff. Probably my first crisis of faith in life was sitting in Sunday school and we were talking about like Genesis and there's only blah number of people on earth and Cain and Abel get into some shit and one of them dies and we send Cain off he's excommunicated off to this other city where he gets married. And I remember just like raising my hand tentatively, this little kid that I am, like, I'm sorry, excuse me, who the fuck are those people? I thought there were only 4 people in the whole world. Well, you just have to have faith. It's a metaphor, except for when we don't want it to be, okay? And I went, this might be stupid. I think I'm done. But that was not that long before I experienced my own death and the things that came after. And I spent a lot of my childhood really not fitting in. That was evident before the bad thing and the other bad things happened. I was always kind of the oddball. And when I died, I experienced some things in the underworld, which I will let everyone go read about in my first book because I talk about it there. That's a fun piece of vulnerability in the first book, is when you're writing and deity you work with is tapping on your shoulder, like, you know how you were assaulted as a literal child and you don't talk about that ever to anyone? What if you wrote a chapter about it in this book right now? So that was a not fun thing to do, but the thing I think about dying, I mean, people talk about near-death experiences a lot. We hear about near-death experiences a ton, but the very definition of near-death is coming close to being dead, but not dying. I experienced something that is sort of colloquially called the Lazarus effect in the medical community. It's when they've attempted to resuscitate you, failed, and time of death has been declared. If you revive spontaneously after that time, it's the Lazarus effect, because you've, in essence, resurrected, I think is the gist. Mm-hmm. 28 minutes is a long time to be dead, I'm told. And 28 minutes is nothing compared to the amount of time it seemed like to me. The underworld was a place that was tangible and real, and I know what it felt like and looked like and smelled like, and this life feels like a strange little vacation into chaos after being there for what felt like a very long time. Mm-hmm. And I think because of that experience, because of how tangible it was to me, and because of everything I saw and felt and heard and did there, I just don't have that kind of wavering. It just feels too ordinary. Mm-hmm. There's a line in a Terry Pratchett novel, and I forget which one off the top of my head, probably one of the Witches books, but I think it's Witches Abroad. Someone can check me on that, send me an angry email. Witches don't believe in gods. It would be like believing in the mailman. You just know them too well to believe in them. Mm-hmm. I know death too well to have a crisis of faith. I just don't think I have it in me.
Yeah.
It's probably not a fun answer, but
no, it is an answer, and I think that's that is the thing. And I think it shows in your book. I mean, it was just like you said, this is not a belief. This is just reality. And I think it shows in the book.
That's terrible for me to be like, I hope readers will feel free to totally disagree with me.
Well, but I think we all probably have our own reality to some extent. I mean, we know our brains and our eyes and our senses and filter everything to create our own reality. I mean, that's science.
I talk about that in my first book, and I elaborate on it in the second a bit. Like, I'm a big proponent of quantum theory and string theory. I talk about that kind of thing a lot. And I do think, I strongly and staunchly believe that there are as many realities as there are minds to imagine them. And there are opportunities for any one of us to touch any one of those worlds. What you believe is real somewhere. And I know what I experienced, and I know what was there for me. Mm-hmm. And I'm totally, completely willing to accept that it was like the coma-addled meanderings of a 5-year-old's deceased brain. But I will tell you this, that for a little kid in a home where we had no access to books, radio, TV, etc., we were aggressively kept from media of every kind. We didn't have education. We stayed home although every day with our parents. For me to meet a deity, come out of that experience knowing their name, that's my tent revival story right there. Because we're talking about me being 5 at the time, and I didn't run away for good until I was 17. That was probably another year after that before I had the right book in my hand to find that deity's name and just sit there with the blood running out of my face, feeling cold, because something that I knew in my bones was real was much realer than I was ready for in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ooh. That's intense. I mean, this is an intense story. And, thank you for being vulnerable and for sharing that. I mean,
I think that's, like I said, I think that's what we can give each other. That's what writers can give, is those parts of themselves. And I don't know, here at the end of this interview, it feels like one of those moments where I've drifted off into the quiet of my own mind, because there's always this part of me that thinks about those moments, and they feel so tangibly close to me. But coming back from that with a sense of purpose and a sense of why I needed to be here and what my job is has really always driven me in a direction. And although that direction may not pointedly have been writing, it was always serving death and working with the dead and creating that bridge between the living and the dead, so that they can find each other and see each other. And for too long, we've treated the dead like there's something wrong with them or something dark or frightening. And they are still human. They are still our loved ones. They still deserve our comfort and our communication and our love and our respect, and an opportunity to consent and be a part of the magic they want to be a part of. And I hope that can be the message of what I write and the things that I do in my lifetime, but that I've encouraged people to think about that again.
Yep. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing with us. And hopefully when book 3 comes out, we can chat again.
I would like that very much. Very much would. But it was a pleasure to be on. And I hope everyone enjoyed.
Thank you. WitchLit is a production of Thousand Volt Press and is edited by Keifel Agostini, who also designed our logo. Our music is Voices, composed for us by Alexander Shanekar. You can support our work, get early access to episodes, ask your own death, sex, religion, politics, money questions, and get some free stuff by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/witchlitpod. Transcripts and all our previous episodes are available at witchlitpod.com, and you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at witchlitpod. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and consider giving us a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps other witches find the show. Thanks for listening and for reading witchy.